Shamed in the battle arena, she became a white Lycan, and the Alpha King lowered his head. From the high walls of the royal arena, banners blackened at the edges flapped in the cold wind, and the murmur of the crowd swelled into a deafening roar. Today was the day of the annual blood trials, a spectacle meant to test courage, skill, and endurance, though often it revealed humiliation more than honor. Among the contenders stood Serenia, her chest heaving, palms slick with sweat. She was no stranger to combat, but today the eyes of the kingdom weighed upon her like stones. Born to a family whose name had once commanded respect, now fallen to disgrace, she carried not only her own pride but the heavy burden of her bloodline. Her fingers tightened around the hilt of her sword as the announcer's voice echoed through the arena. "Let the trials begin," steel clashed. The sound ricocheted off the stone walls, a symphony of violence. Serenia moved with skill, deflecting blows, striking with precision, her mind sharp despite the pounding of her heart. Yet even as she fought, whispers in the crowd reminded her of her status. Disgraced noble, a failed warrior, a shame upon her family, each word cut deeper than any sword. Her opponent was a giant of a man, bred for the arena, his armor dented with scars of victories past. Despite her agility, he cornered her, each strike forcing her backward. Sweat mingled with the dirt on her face, but she refused to falter. She remembered the years of training, the nights spent alone under moonlight, perfecting every movement. She was determined not to show fear, not today, not in front of Eldrith's eyes, but fate had other plans. Her allies, meant to provide support, faltered when the enemy surged forward. A glance to the side revealed betrayal. A fellow contender had stepped aside at the crucial moment, leaving her vulnerable. The man she trusted had abandoned her to protect himself. Pain flared as she was struck down to one knee, her sword sliding across the arena floor. The crowd's roar shifted, laughter, jeers, and whispers of delight at her downfall. Serenia's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. Humiliation burned hotter than any wound. Then from the shadowed balcony above she saw him. Kalen, the Alpha King. Clad in dark robes that seemed woven from shadow itself, he watched silently. Unlike the others, he did not jeer. His gaze was steady, piercing, as though he could see every fracture in her soul. The crown on his head gleamed faintly in the weak sunlight, a symbol of absolute power. Yet his eyes were curious. There was no mockery, only a calm, unreadable awareness. Serenia felt an odd, stirring sensation at that glance, an echo of recognition, as if he saw not just her shame but the fire within her that no arena could truly destroy. It frightened and intrigued her. "Stand," the announcer barked, though it was clear the fight was over. She struggled to her feet, chest aching, pride shattered. The giant opponent raised his sword, ready to end the humiliation with a final blow. But before it could land, something strange happened. A cold, biting wind swept through the arena, unnatural in its intensity. Serenia felt a searing heat within her body and a strange pulse coursed through her veins. Her vision blurred, and she gasped as an unearthly strength surged inside her. The crowd noticed the change too. Murmurs rippled through the stands, some fearful, some awestruck. Her eyes, once a deep brown, now glimmered with a pale, silvery light. Her hair seemed to shimmer unnaturally, and a low, resonant growl escaped her lips, a sound both human and animal. The giant faltered, confused, as if sensing the shift. Serenia felt something awakening within her, a force raw and ancient, unlike anything she had known. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly freeing. The pain of her humiliation was still there, but now it mingled with power, a promise of transformation. Kalen's eyes narrowed slightly, the first trace of something other than curiosity crossing his features. Recognition, interest, perhaps even respect. He leaned forward, silent, letting the moment stretch. Serenia felt exposed under his gaze, yet strangely unafraid. Then the strength ebbed as quickly as it had come, leaving her trembling. She fell to her knees, exhausted but alive. The arena, once filled with mockery, now seemed uncertain. The people whispered of curses, of omens, of the rare white Lycan. Legend said a white Lycan was born from shame and suffering, an outcast touched by both human frailty and supernatural might, a being destined to rise above fear, yet forever misunderstood. Serenia shivered, sensing the truth of it in her bones. She had fallen in the eyes of the kingdom, but in that fall something new had awakened, a force that could not be denied. Her captors came for her, dragging her from the arena as the crowd began to murmur nervously. Whispers of witch, monster, and cursed one followed her like shadows. Yet in the highest balcony Kalen remained silent, his head tilted slightly. There was something in his stance that unsettled the onlookers, a hint of respect, or perhaps an acknowledgement that she was no longer merely a defeated warrior. Night fell over Eldrith as Serenia was carried to the dungeons beneath the castle. The corridors were damp, the air heavy with mildew and despair. She had expected to be left alone with her shame, but instead, the pulse within her stirred again. Her fingers trembled as her reflection in the dark, still puddles of water, revealed the faint shimmer of silver in her eyes. Alone, she allowed herself to remember. Every battle she had fought, every scar she had earned, every betrayal endured, it all had led to this strange awakening. She was no longer the girl dragged into the arena in shame. She was something new, something powerful and terrifying in its potential. Yet with power came fear. Fear of herself, fear of what she might become, and fear of how the world would see her now. Could she control this force? Would it make her strong enough to reclaim her honor, or would it consume her entirely? From the shadows of her cell, a faint echo of a growl answered her unspoken questions. Her senses sharpened, the air thick with possibilities. She realized she was not alone in this transformation. Something within her had changed fundamentally, an instinct older than memory itself. She could feel the pulse of the moon above, its cold light reaching through stone and steel, calling to her, urging her to rise. As she sat in silence, pondering her fate, Kalen's presence lingered in her mind. His eyes, steady and unyielding, haunted her in ways that made her pulse quicken. There was a challenge there, an unspoken tension that neither shame nor rage could erase. Something unformed, powerful, and dangerous, like the first crack of dawn breaking through storm clouds. Hours passed, or perhaps days, time seemed to blur. The hunger within her shifted, no longer for food, but for understanding, for mastery of this strange, wild strength. She tested it silently, clawing at the stone floor, letting the latent power pulse through her muscles, marveling at the speed and strength that surged with every movement. And then she heard the softest sound, almost lost in the hum of the dungeon, the creak of the gate above, a footstep on stone. Her heart leapt. Could it be an enemy, a guard, or perhaps she dared to wonder Kalen himself? Her pulse raced. The white Lycan inside her stirred, and instinctively she tensed, ready for attack or flight. But the moment passed, leaving only the echo of possibility. She realized that the path ahead would be one of struggle, not only against the enemies of her kingdom, but against the fear within herself. As the moonlight slipped through the narrow window above, she allowed herself one thought: she would not remain a victim. Humiliation had sparked this transformation, but it would not define her. She would rise, not just as a warrior, but as something greater, something the kingdom had never seen before. And somewhere in the shadows above, Kalen watched, silent and unjudging, his thoughts unreadable, his gaze fixed on the cell where a fallen warrior began to stir into legend. The first night of her new life ended with trembling, with fire in her heart, and with the faint, terrifying whisper of the wind. You are no longer human, and perhaps you never were meant to be. And in the stillness, as she curled against the cold stone, she made a silent promise. One day, the kingdom that laughed at her would see her rise, and Kalen would know, truly know, the strength of the white Lycan who had been shamed in the arena, the forest beyond the walls of Eldrith was a place most dared not enter. Twisted trees clawed at the gray sky, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for a sun that seemed afraid to shine. Mist curled around roots and stones, hiding shadows that might be friend or foe. To most, it was a place of fear, a realm where the kingdom's law had no reach. But to Serenia, it was freedom. She had fled the dungeons after days of solitude, her newly awakened powers guiding her through the dark. The transformation she had felt in the arena had not faded. It had grown, pulsing in her veins like molten silver. She could sense every movement in the forest, hear the heartbeat of life around her, and even feel the stir of the wind as if it whispered secrets meant only for her. The first few nights were terrifying. Hunger gnawed at her, not just for food, but for understanding of what she had become. Sometimes, in moments of quiet, she saw her reflection in the black water of forest streams and almost did not recognize herself. Her eyes glimmered with a silvery light, her hair shone pale even in shadow, and her body moved with a grace and power that frightened her. Yet she was alive, and more than that, she was strong. The stories of the white Lycan haunted her mind. Legends spoke of a creature born from both human heart and wild spirit, neither fully one nor the other. Some whispered that such beings were destined to bring balance. Others claimed they were harbingers of destruction. She did not yet know which she would become. It was during one cold night, when the forest was quiet but for the soft rustle of leaves, that she sensed a presence. At first, she thought it was an animal, but the aura was different. There was control, authority, and an underlying force she could not ignore. Then he stepped from the shadows. Kalen, the Alpha King, emerged from the mist as if he had been part of it all along. The dark cloak around his shoulders moved silently, and his eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on her. He carried no weapon, yet his presence alone radiated power. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice deep and calm. There was no warmth in it, only certainty. Yet even in that certainty, Serenia felt a spark of something strange, an unspoken acknowledgement of her strength. "I am not afraid," she replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. Her hands itched for her sword, though it remained in the camp she had left behind. "Who are you to step into my forest?" "Some call me king," Kalen answered, his gaze never leaving hers. "I call myself interested." His words were simple, but they carried weight and intensity that made her pulse quicken. Serenia stiffened. Interested in what? In the one who survived the arena and yet changed before my very eyes. Her jaw tightened. She remembered the shame, the humiliation, the jeers, the laughter, and the fleeting moment when his gaze had found her in the crowd. She had not forgotten that. And yet, standing here in the shadowed forest, she could not deny the pull of his presence, a mix of danger and something almost tender. "You should leave," she said finally. "The forest is not safe for you, or for me." Kalen smiled faintly, a shadow of something unspoken in the curve of his lips. "I am not so easily warned." For hours they circled each other in silence, the forest holding its breath. Serenia tested her senses, letting her new instincts guide her. She could feel the rhythm of his heartbeat, the subtle tension in his muscles, the deliberate calm that masked unimaginable strength. And she realized with a thrill and a pang of fear that she could not surprise him, yet he did not seek to harm her. Over the next days, Kalen stayed near the edges of her refuge, neither friend nor enemy. He watched as she hunted, as she explored the limits of her strength, as she grappled with her fears and her new form. Serenia learned quickly that he was patient, methodical, and relentless in observation. He asked few questions, but his eyes seemed to probe her soul, reading her shame, her anger, her longing, and the spark of pride she refused to let die. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, Kalen finally spoke. "You are stronger than you know," he said, "and not just because of what the arena awakened. There is fire in you, fire that even I cannot ignore." Serenia laughed bitterly, brushing a strand of pale hair from her face. Fire, I was mocked in front of the kingdom. I was humiliated. Fire is what they used to burn me with their eyes, their words, their laughter. Kaelin's gaze softened, just enough to make her heart falter. Fire can burn or it can illuminate. You will choose which, Serenia. The name on his lips was strange and intimate. She had not spoken it aloud in months. No one had dared to call her by it, not since the arena. His voice carried authority, yes, but also reverence. Something that made her feel seen, truly seen. That night she dreamt of the arena. The crowd's laughter still echoed, but there was a new presence in the dream, a silver glow that wrapped around her, a warmth that seemed both strange and comforting. She woke to the whisper of the wind, her senses alive with the power coursing through her body. The transformation was no longer just physical, it was mental, emotional, spiritual. She could feel her instincts sharpening, her confidence building, yet the fear remained. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone? The betrayal of her fellow contender lingered, a shadow over every word and gesture. And Kaelin, despite his calm authority, was a king, someone whose motives were often hidden, whose decisions could affect entire kingdoms. Weeks passed. Serenia learned to move through the forest like a shadow, hunting and surviving, testing the limits of her new form. Kaelin remained nearby, often silent, occasionally offering guidance when she asked for it. Slowly she realized that his presence, once a source of tension, became a kind of anchor. When danger approached, she could sense him even before he spoke. When doubt threatened to consume her, she felt his gaze at her back, steady and unwavering. One morning, as mist clung to the forest like a soft veil, a band of rogue warriors entered the trees. They were heavily armed, eyes greedy and cruel, seeking to capture or kill any outcast rumored to roam the woods. Serenia tensed, feeling the animal within her stir. Kaelin appeared beside her, silent as the shadows, his presence commanding. "You fight," he said simply, "or you run, the choice is yours." She knew she could not run, not anymore. With a growl that startled even herself, she leapt forward, a blur of motion and power. The battle was swift, each movement precise and lethal, her instincts guiding her as the white Lycan within surged. Kaelin fought beside her, silent and efficient, yet she noticed something in the way he watched her, pride, awe, something dangerous and tender all at once. When the last warrior fell, the forest fell silent. Serenia's chest heaved, sweat mingling with dirt, her body alive with adrenaline. Kaelin stepped forward, and for a moment, words failed them both. "You survived," he said finally. "And you fought not as the fallen warrior of Eldrith, but as something more." She lowered her gaze, still breathing hard. "I do not know if I am more or if I am something else entirely. A monster, perhaps." He crouched slightly, bringing his eyes to meet hers. "No. You are neither fully human nor fully beast. You are the one the kingdom fears to understand, and yet you are the one I respect." The words struck her like lightning. Respect. Not fear, not pity, not mockery, respect. And in that moment, something inside her shifted again. She realized that she no longer needed the approval of the crowd, the arena, or the kingdom. She needed her own understanding, her own control. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could trust Kaelin. Days turned into weeks. Serenia and Kaelin developed an unspoken rhythm, moving through the forest, hunting, training, and surviving together. There was tension, yes, fire and friction that sparked in every glance and touch, but also trust, understanding, and the beginnings of something neither fully acknowledged. One night, under the pale glow of a full moon, Serenia approached the river that cut through the forest. Her reflection shimmered on the water, silver eyes staring back. Kaelin appeared silently behind her. "You have grown," he said softly, "stronger than I imagined." "And you?" she asked, glancing at him. "Have you changed?" He hesitated. "I see you differently now," he admitted. "Stronger, fiercer, and yet not alone. Perhaps I underestimated what it meant to be a king and a man, watching someone rise from the ashes." Their eyes met, and in the silent forest, with the moonlight casting silver across their faces, something fragile and dangerous blossomed between them. Trust, respect, and the first hint of desire, tempered by fear and honor. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of the wild, the untamed, and the unknown. Serenia felt the pulse of the forest, the strength within herself, and the weight of destiny settling gently on her shoulders. She was no longer the girl who had been shamed in the arena. She was the white Lycan, rising from fire and shame, and she would not be broken again. Yet even as she embraced her strength, she could not ignore the lingering tension, the question of what Kaelin truly wanted, the shadow of the kingdom's politics, and the dangerous prophecy that hovered over her like a storm cloud. Her journey had only begun. And somewhere in the quiet heart of the forest, a dark presence watched, unseen but aware, waiting for the moment to challenge her, to test her, and to force her to choose between survival, power, and the fragile, flickering light of trust she had begun to build with the Alpha King. The kingdom of Eldrith lay under a heavy gray sky, its towers darkened by smoke from distant fires. The court was tense, rumors of rebellion and dark magic spreading like wildfire. Word of a strange warrior roaming the forests, a white Lycan born from shame and power, had reached every corner of the realm. Some whispered fearfully, some spoke in awe. For Serenia, the forest had been a refuge, a place to grow, to master her powers, to discover who she was beyond the arena. But even the safest forests could not hold her forever. The kingdom needed her strength, and Kaelin, the Alpha King, insisted she come with him. "You cannot hide in the shadows forever," he said, his dark cloak brushing the damp leaves as they walked toward the castle gates. "The world is moving, and so must you." Serenia kept her gaze forward, though her heart raced. "The court, the people, they do not understand. They will fear me or worse." Kaelin's voice was calm but unwavering. "Fear is the tool of the weak. Power and purpose are the weapons of the strong. You have both, Serenia. They will learn to see you as you are." She wanted to believe him, but doubt clung to her like mist. The court had mocked her family, and her shame in the arena was not easily forgotten. Could she really face nobles and kings, knights and enemies, without faltering? The journey to the castle was long, the forest slowly giving way to open fields, the shadows of mountains in the distance. Along the way, Kaelin spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. "You are not just surviving," he said as they rested by a small river. "You are shaping yourself into something the kingdom has never seen, and perhaps something the kingdom will never forget." Serenia's reflection shimmered in the water, pale hair, silver eyes, a figure both human and otherworldly. She touched her cheek, still startled by the strength she now possessed. "I feel different," she admitted. "Sometimes I do not even recognize myself." Kaelin nodded. "Good. That difference is your power. Embrace it, or it will control you. Do not let fear dictate who you are." Her pulse quickened, not from fear this time, but from the tension that lingered whenever he spoke. There was authority in him, yes, but also a quiet acknowledgement of her strength. It unsettled her, in a way that was both frightening and intoxicating. By the time they reached the castle, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the stone walls. Guards and courtiers paused, unsure whether to bow or flee as the white Lycan and the Alpha King entered. Whispers followed them through the corridors. The Cursed One, the girl who survived, the white Lycan herself. Serenia felt their stares like daggers, yet she held her head high. She had faced far worse than fear. Her pride, her shame, her anger, they were now tools in her hands. Kaelin walked beside her, silent and powerful, as if his presence alone commanded respect. In the throne room, nobles gathered, their faces masks of curiosity and suspicion. Kaelin stood before them, his voice cutting through the murmurs like steel. "This warrior," he said, gesturing to Serenia, "has proven her strength, her courage, and her loyalty. She is no longer a subject of shame, but a guardian of this kingdom. You will address her with respect, as you would address any knight, any warrior, any ally. Some bowed hesitantly, others whispered, their fear evident. Serenia's chest tightened, but she did not flinch. The fire within her burned, a mixture of pride and defiance. She would not allow the past to define her, yet court life was no refuge. Political intrigue surrounded every step. Allies and enemies alike tested her resolve, trying to gauge whether the rumors of her power were real. Some sought to manipulate her, others sought to provoke her. And through it all, Kaelin remained at her side, silent, watchful, protective. "Do you trust me?" he asked one evening as they walked through the moonlit gardens. The scent of night-blooming flowers filled the air, the only sound the rustle of leaves. I do not know," Serenia admitted, her voice quiet. "You are a king. You command armies and laws and loyalty. How could I trust you completely?" Kaelin stopped, looking at her with a gaze that was both intense and gentle. "Trust is not given lightly. It is earned. And you have earned mine through courage, through strength, through the fire I have seen in you." Her pulse quickened. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight she had not expected. There was truth in them and something else, something unspoken, dangerous, and alluring. Days passed, and together they faced threats that came from both within and outside the kingdom. Dark forces sought to exploit the curse of the White Lycan, aiming to manipulate the prophecy that whispered of a hybrid who could unite or destroy. Each battle tested their skills, their trust, and the growing tension between them. During one confrontation, a rogue sorcerer attempted to bind Serenia with enchanted chains, designed to weaken her power. Kaelin intervened, deflecting the sorcerer's magic with a gesture that was fluid and precise, as if he had anticipated every move. "Do you see?" he asked afterward, his voice low and steady. "Even the darkest forces fear you, even they recognize your strength. And yet you hesitate to see it yourself." Serenia's hands clenched. "I hesitate because I remember shame, I remember weakness, I remember falling." Kaelin stepped closer, his presence enveloping her. "Falling is not weakness, it is the path to strength. And you, Serenia, have risen higher than most ever could." Their eyes met, the air thick with unspoken words. Neither moved closer, yet neither could ignore the pull between them. Respect, trust, and something deeper simmered, a fire that neither wanted to admit yet could not deny. One night, as the castle slept, Serenia walked along the balcony, staring at the moonlit gardens below. The kingdom seemed quiet, peaceful, yet she could sense the undercurrent of tension, plots and schemes, fears and loyalties shifting like shadows. Kaelin joined her silently, standing beside her without a word. "The world does not understand you," he said softly, "but I do. And that matters more than anything they say." She glanced at him, her heart stirring. I do not know if I am ready for the world to see me as I am." He placed a hand near hers, close enough to feel the warmth but not touching. "You will be ready. And when you are, I will stand beside you, not above you, not below, beside." The words hung in the air like a promise, a spark that ignited something deep within her. She had never felt such clarity, such acceptance. And yet the fear lingered, fear of betrayal, fear of loss, fear of the unknown. Then came the challenge that would test them both. A dark army, unseen but sensed in the whispers of the wind, approached the kingdom's borders. They were not ordinary soldiers, but twisted creatures of shadow and malice, bound to the will of a sorcerer who sought to harness the White Lycan's power for his own gain. Kaelin turned to Serenia, his eyes sharp and commanding. "This is not a trial of strength alone. This is a trial of trust, of strategy, and of fire. Are you ready?" Serenia felt the power within her surge. The animal inside her stirred, sensing the danger, sensing the rhythm of the battle to come. She had trained, she had grown, she had embraced the fire within herself. Now she was ready to prove not only her strength but her will, her courage, and the bond she shared with Kaelin. "I am ready," she said, her voice steady, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. "Let them come." The next day, on the edge of the kingdom's fields, the first wave of the dark army appeared. Shadows flickered like living things, and the air grew cold with malice. Serenia and Kaelin stood side by side, their movements synchronized, a dance of power and strategy. She leapt forward, her claws flashing, her speed unmatched. Kaelin moved like shadow and steel, precise, controlled, and deadly. Together they were a force neither human nor fully beast could oppose. Yet amid the chaos, Serenia caught a glimpse of something that made her heart skip. Kaelin, in the heat of battle, glanced at her, not with calculation but with awe, admiration, and something deeper, something that made her pulse race. When the battle ended, the field littered with shadows vanquished, Serenia fell to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Kaelin approached, bowing his head slightly, not in submission but in acknowledgement of her strength, her courage, her fire. "Today," he said quietly, "you proved what I have long suspected. You are no longer the girl who fell in the arena. You are a warrior, a white Lycan, and perhaps something more." Serenia looked up at him, their eyes meeting in a moment of quiet understanding. The tension, the fire, the respect, they were no longer just between allies. Something had begun, fragile yet undeniable. And as the moon rose high above the kingdom, casting silver light on two figures standing amid shadows and victory, Serenia understood a truth she had not yet admitted. Her journey was far from over, but the fire that bound her to Kaelin, to her destiny, and to herself, had begun to burn brighter than any fear. The sky above Eldrith had turned a strange color that morning, a mix of storm gray and pale gold, as if the sun and clouds themselves could not agree. A hush had fallen over the kingdom. Word had spread that a dark army, bound to a sorcerer's will, marched toward the borders. Whispers spoke of curses, of shadows that devoured light, and of a hybrid warrior who could either save the realm or be consumed by it. Serenia stood at the edge of the castle balcony, the wind tugging at her pale hair. She was no longer the girl who had been shamed in the arena. The white Lycan within her had grown, its power tempered by her human heart and the lessons of the forest. Her silver eyes caught the distant horizon, the first glimmer of enemy banners in the distance. Kaelin stepped up beside her, silent as always. He placed a hand near hers, close enough to feel her warmth but careful not to touch. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Serenia's lips pressed into a determined line. "I am," she replied. "We cannot wait for them to decide our fate, we must take it." The soldiers gathered, lined in formation at the castle gates, their armor glinting faintly. Knights, archers, and warriors all ready to defend their home. But the eyes of the kingdom, the very people who had once jeered at her, now watched with a mixture of hope and fear. And in those eyes, Serenia saw not pity but expectation. She carried more than her own destiny. She carried theirs. The dark army arrived at dusk, shadows rolling across the fields like living waves. The sorcerer who commanded them rode a black steed, his robes trailing like smoke. His eyes burned with malice, and his voice carried across the battlefield like thunder. "Step forward, hybrid," he bellowed. "Show me the strength you claim to hold. Show me why the legends speak of a white Lycan." Serenia felt the pulse of her own power surge, the white Lycan within awakening fully. The animal instincts, the heightened senses, the incredible speed and strength, they were hers to command. She looked to Kaelin. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable, yet she felt the silent trust he offered. Together they would face this threat. "Stand with me," Kaelin said, his hand finally brushing hers. "Not a touch of romance alone, but a bond forged in fire and battle. We fight, side by side, as equals." She nodded, her heart swelling with determination and an unfamiliar warmth. The fire of their connection, subtle but undeniable, flared between them. The battle began with a surge of shadows, twisted warriors that moved unnaturally, striking with speed and ferocity. Serenia leapt forward, her movements a blur. Claws and strength met dark steel. Every strike, every dodge, every growl was precise, controlled, and deadly. She was no longer afraid. She was power incarnate. Kalen moved beside her, his sword and skill unmatched. Together, they were a force the Dark Army could not anticipate. Serenia noticed how his eyes followed her, not with command, but with recognition, with respect, with something deeper. Each glance stoked the unspoken fire between them, a tension that was both dangerous and comforting. Hours passed, the battlefield a mix of smoke, shadow, and bloodless chaos. The sorcerer unleashed magic that twisted the land, creating illusions, fire, and ice. Serenia felt herself grow stronger with each strike, each moment of focus. The white lichen was not just a form, it was a part of her, integrated with her mind, her heart, her will. At the height of the battle, the sorcerer conjured a shadow beast, enormous and terrifying, its eyes glowing like embers. It moved with a speed that matched her own, a dark mirror of the white lichen. Serenia knew that to defeat it, she would have to embrace both her human heart and the beast within fully. Kalen fought the sorcerer, holding him at bay with unmatched skill, giving Serenia the moment she needed. She inhaled deeply, letting the white lichen surge through her. Her eyes glimmered silver, her claws sharpened, her muscles moved with supernatural strength. She charged the shadow beast, her roar cutting through the air. The fight was fierce, a dance of power and strategy. Each strike Serenia made was guided by instinct and intellect, each dodge a mix of human agility and lichen strength. Slowly, the shadow beast faltered, weakened by her relentless assault. With a final leap, she struck the creature with all her strength, banishing it from the battlefield in a flash of light that stunned all who watched. The sorcerer, seeing his greatest weapon destroyed, faltered. Kalen pressed the advantage, striking with precision, and finally the dark figure collapsed, powerless. Silence fell over the field. Soldiers and citizens alike watched in awe, the impossible now proven real. Serenia sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Kalen stepped beside her, bowing his head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of her strength and courage. "You have done what no one thought possible," he said quietly. "You have not just survived, you have saved this kingdom." Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her silver eyes catching the fading light. I could not have done it without you." Kalen's expression softened, the tension of command easing into something more human, more personal. "No, we did this together. And today, you are not just the white lichen. You are a hero, a guardian, and a part of this kingdom in a way that will never be forgotten." For a long moment they stood side by side, the battlefield quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant cries of victory. The fire between them, once subtle and dangerous, now glimmered openly, a bond forged in trust, respect, and shared triumph. Serenia felt a wave of emotion she had never allowed herself before. Pride, relief, gratitude, and something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken when Kalen's eyes met hers. She realized that she no longer feared the judgment of others. She had risen above shame, above fear, above doubt. And in doing so, she had found something she had not expected, a connection with someone who truly saw her for who she was. In the days that followed, the kingdom began to heal. Soldiers returned to their homes, the dark forces scattered, and whispers of the white lichen spread, not with fear but with reverence. Nobles who once mocked her bowed in acknowledgement, some seeking favor, others merely to show respect. Kalen, as always, remained near her side. Not commanding, not dominating, but present, steady, unwavering. And in quiet moments he would speak softly, not of battles or politics, but of understanding, trust, and the fire that had brought them together. One night under a silver moon, Serenia and Kalen walked through the castle gardens. The scent of flowers mingled with the cool night air, and the world seemed at peace. "You have changed this kingdom," Kalen said, his voice low and intimate. "Not just with power, but with heart. You have shown them what it means to rise above shame, above fear." Serenia smiled faintly. And you have changed too. You have shown me that a king can see with more than eyes, he can see with heart. Kaelin stopped, looking at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You are no longer the one who fell in the arena. You are not only strong, you are extraordinary. And I am proud to stand beside you. The words, simple yet powerful, resonated through her. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope, to feel, to acknowledge the bond that had grown between them. A bond forged in fire, struggle, trust, and understanding. Then let us build a new future, Serenia said softly. Not ruled by shame, fear, or shadow, but by strength, courage, and unity, together. Kaelin's hand brushed hers, this time fully, warm and reassuring. Together, he echoed. The kingdom of Eldrith would remember this day, not as the day of the White Lycan's fear or shame, but as the day of her rise, the day of redemption, and the day two souls bound by fire and trust began a new legend together. Above them the moon shone silver, casting its light across the castle, the gardens, and two figures standing united. The White Lycan and the Alpha King, warrior and protector, strength and honor. And in that quiet, luminous moment, Serenia understood fully. Her journey had begun in shame, transformed in fire, and would now continue in light. The wind whispered through the night, carrying promises of future battles, future victories, and the enduring fire that bound them, not just to each other, but to the destiny they had forged together. And as they stood side by side, the world seemed to pause, acknowledging the legend that had risen from darkness, fear, and courage alike. For Serenia, the White Lycan, and Kaelin, the Alpha King, the story was far from over, but this chapter, this moment, would shine forever in the annals of Eldrith.